If you're here, The Legend of Spyro shouldn't need an introduction. The attempted reboot series was either the best or the worst thing to happen to the franchise, depending entirely on who you ask. In either case, this isn't supposed to be classic Spyro, yet this trilogy is often judged like it should be. But if A Hero's Tale and the unfinished Enter the Dragonfly are anything to go by, the series had stagnated and was in dire need of a refresh. As someone whose first introduction to the character was the horribly butchered Skylanders redesign, I never grew up with any of the true Spyros. I only got into Spyro as a franchise when the Reignited trilogy came out, easily one of the best remasters of a classic series. After playing through Legend of Spyro though, I think this trilogy should get a similar treatment. Now I know that's not gonna happen, but Legend of Spyro is much more than a Lord of the Rings knockoff as it is often dismissed as. The series certainly has its fans, me now among them, although it's hard to say whether classic Spyro or Legends is definitively better. Given how this trilogy starts, however, Legend of Spyro is certainly at a disadvantage. A New Beginning is easily the weakest of this trilogy, being a fairly basic game in so many ways without anything that makes it feel truly special. So without further ado, let's delve into the origin of this controversial trilogy. While the advertisements for this game were purposely vague on what Legend of Spyro would be, the title is straight to the point. This game really is a new beginning for the franchise as a whole. As such, it is only fair to judge it on its own merits. This game was never going to be classic Spyro. The only comparisons that can be reasonably drawn comes in terms of appearance and the similarities the two styles of Spyro games have. Right from the get-go, A New Beginning makes a decent first impression. In an era where so many games were pushing for realism, Legend of Spyro's first two entries have a very charming, simplistic art style. Previously, Spyro went for a bright, whimsical appearance. The Legend series can be whimsical as well, particularly in this entry, but the overall look of the world is a lot more grounded and moody. I tend to prefer this look, but that's entirely my own taste, and the overall darker lighting fits the more gritty tone rather well. However, there are moments where this art style doesn't do the story justice. In the ending cutscene for the first level, Spyro is supposed to be looking down on a desecrated land, but things look fine? Maybe orange, but that could very easily be the sunrise. This game also hasn't aged the best in looks terms either, primarily in regards to character animations. They appear somewhat awkward and goofy most of the time, especially while speaking. Ignitus in particular has the issue of his face changing expressions with nearly every word. Speaking of new characters, pretty much all of them have good designs. Each of the new dragons is very distinct, and Adult Cinder in particular looks fantastic. In terms of redesigns, there's just Sparks and Spyro. I don't even mind how Sparks looks here, as jarring as it was at first. Spyro, on the other hand... Spyro's design in this game is just strange. While this is nowhere near as bad as his Skylanders design, it has a lot of the same symptoms. His head is very rounded, with a relatively small snout that doesn't even follow his jaw. His nose stretches out over his mouth a fair bit and awkwardly wiggles with every move. His jaw also ends behind his eyes and is stuck in a near permanent awkward smile. Not to mention how large his eyes are. I question if he has any room for his brain up there. I'm also not a fan of how his new fins look. They undulate at the slightest movement despite being quite small, and oddly enough, he looks worse in the pre-rendered cutscenes thanks to that flat mouth. Ugh. This design did eventually grow on me, but it should have looked more like his Dawn of the Dragon appearance. As said before, I think Adult Cinder looks great, but Young Cinder has a similar problem to Spyro. Her head's too big. It looks awkward on her skinny frame and unnaturally wide. Once again, Dawn of the Dragon's design is much better, although I would have kept her original color scheme. I've rambled about looks enough. It's time we got into why this game is such a departure from the classic series. The gameplay. The Legend of Spyro series leans heavily into combat rather than exploration or platforming, especially in this entry. While the sequels separated their fights with platforming and a few puzzles, A New Beginning has shockingly little of both. Every level is padded with fight after fight, often lasting several minutes. Spyro still has his classic breath attacks and charge, but the latter has been heavily nerfed. The charge is much slower and does pitiful damage with a heavy recoil. The main use I found for it is travel, although with how gimped the turning is, it's only useful in long straight stretches. As for his breath, he unlocks fire very early in the first level, lightning in the second, ice in the third, and earth in the next. Fire acts as a damage over time and can be upgraded to cause enemies to panic. Lightning stuns, ice turns weak enemies into snowballs, and slows stronger ones, while earth breath does burst damage with a bit of a knockback. Each breath also has a secondary ability unlocked at the end of their respective level. Fire has a ranged bomb, electric has a homing shot that knocks enemies into the air, ice shoots icicles for slowing and damage, while earth fires a tornado that knocks enemies up. The only one of these I ever used was Firebomb. Additionally, Spyro has one button to attack, and you'll be mashing it quite a lot. There are various combos that he can perform depending on if he's in the air or not. On the ground, the combo is very focused and weak, but in the air he can combo an enemy without interruption or perform strong spinning attacks. While comboing in the air, the charge button will knock an enemy away, which can damage any other enemy caught in its path. The more I played, the more I leaned into the air combos as they hit much faster, and the slight bit of ending lag is never an issue given how weak most enemies are. There's also a finicky lock-on system that allows you to strafe around enemies and sidestep attacks. This, much like the charge, is very situational and I rarely found myself using it. Most often turning and running was better for avoiding hits. I even wrote an entire version of the script without a single mention of the lock-on. As I hinted earlier, there was a lot of mashing that one attack button to dispense enemies with breath attacks woven between. If you don't want to turn this game into a complete joke, that is. Lightning Breath can be upgraded fairly early to knock enemies around, including off of ledges with absolutely no consequence. Earth Breath can also be upgraded to do ridiculous amounts of damage, shredding even the toughest enemies in seconds. Given how many monkeys this game throws at you, I feel no shame in exploiting these abilities. As stated before, instead of extending levels with puzzles or platforming, every room in this game throws waves of monkey enemies at you, and that never changes. Every level is filled with the same copy-paste monkeys, but in different colors. Oh wow, such variety in the combat! The only strategy to speak of in this game is hit big monkey, ignore little monkey until big monkey gone. From beginning to end, these monkeys never change. They never become an actual threat, they're all meatbags meant to inflate the runtime. There are unique enemies in each level, but they're so few and far between that they don't offer enough variety to make combat any interesting. The only ones I thought were neat were these armadillos in level 3 and the swamp monsters in the first level. Most others were just a minor annoyance. For as much potential as the combat system has, it is never utilized beyond grinding through waves of enemies over and over and over and over. Also, since Earth and Lightning are so strong, there's very little reason to use Fire Breath once you unlock them, and I never found a use for Ice. The slow it applies is barely noticeable and takes way too long to apply, and for no damage at that. It also actively slows down combat by turning the weak enemies into non-attackable snowballs. This could be useful if fights were dangerous and you need to split enemies, like the Eternal Night. But nothing hits hard enough to be a threat, and enemies always drop more than they take away. You could mindlessly button mash every fight and win. It'd take forever, but you'd get there. As such, this game's difficulty is nearly non-existent. There are very few areas where dying even punishes you. Spyro respawns with full resources and all slain enemies stay dead, so ironically, dying to regain magic can be more efficient than living and smacking. Speaking of that magic, Spyro needs it to use his breath weapons, indicated by the green bar below his red health meter. Enemies and crystals drop both red and green gems to refill these bars, while additional blue and purple gems have other purposes. After finishing the first level, Spyro unlocks his Fire Fury ability, a massive nuke that wipes the screen, indicated by the purple circle around the breath indicator. When it's full, you can unleash it. Every element has one, but they all do the same thing. It also takes forever to charge and mostly serves as a skip for a given encounter. With how low the difficulty is and how most enemies can be dealt with by knocking them off a cliff, I barely use the Furies. The blue gems, on the other hand, give you Spirit, which is like experience points. On the pause menu, you can spend them to upgrade your breath abilities. Pretty simple stuff. This system is nice, but with enough time, you unlock everything, so there's no sort of RPG-style progression or unlocking, but that's not really an issue. This is a kid's game after all, so the simple system works well here. What does annoy me is that the primary and secondary abilities are upgraded separately, with the Fury only getting an upgrade once both are fully upgraded. Not that it matters too much, given how strong they start out. Onto the actual levels, there's 5, but they all play very similarly. Follow the path, fight waves upon waves of monkeys, solve 1 or 2 very basic puzzles that the game tells you how to solve, and fight a pushover boss at the end. Each of these levels takes about an hour to finish, and that's not a good thing. They rarely have any variety to them, and the little variety there is boils down to slightly different takes on the same theme as the rest of the level. I was pretty bored of the looks of each level by the time I finished, especially the plain white and dull grays of the final level. Oddly, the first level has the most variety, and that only decreases with each. For a quick description of the first, you start out in the day chasing sparks through swampy terrain, then run through mushroom cliffs in the evening and explore overgrown ruined temple ruins at night. That sort of progression would have been nice to see in other levels, but it simply isn't present. Level 2, Dante's Freezer, very funny name by the way, ends in an ice cave, but at that point, the level is over in 5 minutes. Level 3 is a gauntlet of monkeys on a ship near the end, level 4 has an admittedly very fun train chase 2/3 too, and the final level has an annoyingly long stop-and-go elevator ride that serves as another monkey gauntlet. In between each level is a training segment, where you are taught how to use your new breath and unlock the secondary and Fury abilities. These last too long, are very boring, and often tell you things you might have already figured out just by using your breath in the level before. The first segment is the worst though. It teaches you basic combos that I had already figured out and had been doing for almost an hour before. Maybe you could have let the player discover how these abilities work instead of flat out telling them. That might add a tiny bit of challenge and would have made this a little more fun for me. There's also 2 flying segments, each one easier than the last, with the first being just before Dante's Freezer and the second at the end of level 4. These are nice breaks from the main game, but they last too long and have very little going on, especially the second flight, which, despite being a chase, feels more like a casual glide with the occasional pesky explosion to dodge. I think I made it pretty clear how little I like playing this game. The combat system has potential on paper, but here it is executed very poorly. The simplicity makes it approachable, but at the end of the day, there's no real depth to it. The breaths feel like a minor variation to the same ability, secondary attacks even more so, and nothing is dangerous enough to warrant strategizing beyond attacking the biggest monkey you see. So, how about the bosses? They're all pushovers. Sure, they hit hard, but dodging is very easy, and there are crystals lit around the arenas. No joke, the fastest way to defeat any of them is to spam your strongest breath attack until the next phase, die to regain magic, and do it again. As, when you die, the game puts you back to the beginning of the phase you were on before you died. None of these bosses felt satisfying to beat, they all just died eventually. They're minor speed bumps, which feels especially disappointing on the final boss. For as much build-up as she gets, Cinder is a huge letdown. She's easily the toughest boss, but she's still a total joke. Spam Earth Breath, break Crystal, phase 2. Wait for her to land, spam Breath, Crystal, dead. You could fight her in melee, but in which case she is kinda hard. But with how plentiful the crystals are, there's no real reason to. Poor Cinder gets no justice in this game. For a character I grew to really like in the sequel, she gets nothing here. And speaking of her character, we should get to another major focus of this game, the story. Like everything else in A New Beginning, the story is simple and repetitive. It follows the hero's journey archetype very closely. Not a bad thing necessarily, but it's uninteresting. And what starts off as a compelling hook, Spyro wanting to discover where he came from, is immediately resolved, and we're off to saving dragons for the rest of the adventure. You know, that kind of sounds familiar. Upon starting a new game, we hear the voice of Gary Oldman, who plays Ignitus, probably the best of the new characters in this game, if we're not considering Cinder in the sequels. He narrates the events of the night before Spyro hatched, with the Dragon Temple, where Spyro and various other eggs were being hatched, came under attack. Ignitus flees with Spyro's egg, and he places the unborn dragon on a mushroom head and lets it drift down the river. As he returns to the temple, he looks on in horror at events that will be revealed later. We snap to the morning where Spyro's egg is drifting down the river, only for it to be discovered by a dragonfly couple who adopt and give our scaly hero his name. This intro already sets the tone for the series quite well. It is a fair bit darker than classic Spyro, which was always lighthearted and very lax on stakes. The Legend series takes itself far more seriously and is much more story-focused than what came before. Once the pre-rendered cutscene ends, we transition to the first in-game cinematic, showing Spyro and Sparx messing around, with Ignitus narrating Spyro's life. Spyro believes himself to be a dragonfly, a very large and scaly dragonfly apparently. Spyro is voiced by Elijah Wood, who does a good job of portraying this more grounded, serious, compassionate Spyro, as opposed to the eager and attitude-filled Spyro before, although sometimes it's hard to not hear Frodo. And then there's Sparx.
Yeah, no offense, but this place is a bit of a dump.
In every entry of this trilogy, Sparx has a different voice actor. Here, he's voiced by David Spade, and either he or the director did not give a flying fuck. Every one of Sparx's lines sounds more monotone and careless than I do. And on top of that, Sparx is a massive asshole. I question why he and Spyro are friends multiple times in this game. Sure, they were raised like brothers, but Sparx never says a kind thing to the purple dragon. The closest he gets is showing some remorse after almost getting Spyro crushed, but the moment Spyro frees himself, he's back to not giving a shit. I wish Spyro let him get eaten the first level. Anyways, after some quick tutorials, Sparx gets forward, Spyro frees him, he flies away, and gets captured by monkeys. Nice job there, idiot. Fight some monkeys, unlock Fire Breath, save Sparx, go visit Mom and Dad. It is here Spyro learns he's not a dragonfly. Who could have possibly seen this one coming? And a few days later, he decides to leave his kind, leaving Sparx behind. For all of 10 minutes, can you go away? Fight more monkeys and we find Ignitus, who's completely given up. Thanks to Spyro's questions and determination, the old dragon relents and explains the plot. As it turns out, Spyro is a special dragon because he's purple, with abilities unmatched by any other. Ever since the temple raid, the dragons guarding the temple have been fighting the monkey menace. That was until the black dragon Cinder appeared and started capturing them. Because of this, Ignitus was his hiding, until now that is. We're then guided to the temple to solve the easiest puzzles known to dragonkind, fight more monkeys, and Ignitus regains his fighting spirit, showing off abilities that he'll teach Spyro in just a few moments. One boring training sequence later, it's off to rescue Volteer, the first of the Dragon Guardians. In an admittedly very nice scene, Ignitus teaches Spyro to fly.
Tell me I run, got it.
But, Ignitus, how do we get there?
I'm glad you asked.
Why are you smiling? I don't like it.
Let me get this straight. You're saying that I can fly?
Maybe you've been hanging in those caves a little too long, old man. Spyro can't fly, we all know that.
Yeah, a bit of fresh air might do you good. I've never flown in my life.
It's you that will be getting some fresh air, Spyro. Now, close your eyes, take a deep breath, and empty your mind. Yes, that's it. Now feel the power of your ancestors coursing through your body. In times of crisis, they will come to you and teach you, unlocking powers you never knew you had.
Boy, this I gotta see.
Just forget everything you ever thought you knew. Forget yourself. Only through forgetting will you remember what your ancient blood already knows. You can fly.
While the story as a whole is basic, there are good moments in it, like this one. So, while I may be speeding through it, I do like the story of this game. Spyro flies off to Dante's freezer, beats up monkeys, and these armored Vikings, easily the hardest enemies in this game, until he finds Volteer. One easy boss later, and the Chatterbox is rescued. We return to the temple for even more training, oh goody. After that, Volteer says Cinder drained him of his powers, so it's off to Tall Plains to rescue Cyril the Ice Dragon. Cinder's forces have forced the native llama people into hiding, except for the second most annoying character in this game, Kane. Rescue him a few times throughout the level to no thanks. It is during this process where Spyro somehow learns Ice Breath. At least with electricity, he got shocked beforehand. Here it just happens because The plot needs him to. That is the best excuse I have ever heard. Eventually, Spyro reaches the shrine and we face another easy boss to free Cyril. We get worshipped and then leave this primitive, barbaric society to return to the Dragon Temple and train more. Ignitus finds out Terrador the Earth Dragon is being held in a volcano named Boys It Big. Boys It Big. Real funny there. Real funny. And if that wasn't funny enough, it is the home of a mole race named the Man Were Smalls. Man Were Small. I bet someone was having a laugh. At least Dante's freezer was actually clever. Fly to the volcano, find one of the mole leaders, go save moles. Go for a train ride, save more moles, and now we're fighting Thomas the Tank Engine. This is easily the best boss in the game, if only because the gimmick of running it into a wall is kinda neat. Still pathetically easy though. After scrapping this really useful engine and its fat controller, we save Terrador, just as Cinder arrives. The green dragon gets wing slapped, and Cinder locks eyes with Spyro, prompting the second flying segment, probably the easiest part of this game. One eventful chase sequence later, and Ignitus swoops in to save the day, only to get captured. Instead of going to fight Cinder, like we should be doing, Terrador tells us to return to the temple so he can show us how cool Earth Breath is. Afterwards, the dragons let slip that Cinder is trying to open a portal, and Ignitus is the last dragon she needs. Nice job there, buddy. You're the reason Malefor returns. Oh wait, he hasn't been name dropped yet. Sorry. Ignitus is the reason the Dark Master returns. It's off to the final level for Spyro, and it's a whole bunch of fighting monkeys. I was worried there wasn't enough of that. One reskin rematch, and the slowest elevator ride later, we catch up to Ignitus. Before Spyro can save him, Cinder steps in the way, and Spyro decides to stand his ground. Another easy boss later, and Cinder runs away like a cartoon villain with the final crystal. With the return of the Dark Master nigh, only now does Ignitus spill the beans on Cinder and her nefarious plans. As it turns out, Cinder was born the same year as Spyro, taken from the Dragon Temple after all the other eggs were crushed. It's pretty dark if you think about it. Spyro says there was something familiar about her, even though they were both eggs when the temple was attacked. Of course, Cinder has undergone some typical evil corruption magic to make her all evil, big, monstrous, and sexy. Wait, did I say that out loud? She was corrupted and brainwashed to be the Dark Master's puppet, and the portal she is opening will mark his return. Kinda. While it's not explained here, Malefor's essence lies within the portal, while his spirit is trapped elsewhere. Just as Ignitus finishes, the portal to the Dark Master's prison, the Convexity Realm, opens, and it's time for a final showdown. After some quick platforming. As said before, Cinder is a disappointing pushover that ends in a fairly cinematic way. Spyro absorbs the dark powers within Convexity and learns Dark Fury, which he unleashes upon Cinder. The Black Dragoness crumbles, and the Dark Master's influence leaves her, reverting her back to her admittedly pretty adorable true self.
Oh, she is just like me.
Dude, we gotta get out of here now.
I can't leave her behind. I've got to save her.
What? Save the beast that's been trying to kill us?
Yeah, that wasn't her fault. She was being used by the Dark Master. Now we can go.
I'm right behind you, buddy. Mommy, fluff my pillow.
With Cinder safe, Spyro wakes up in the Dragon Temple, drained of his powers, and what would have been a nice, heartfelt ending scene from all the dragons apologizing to Cinder and offering hope for the future turns into Sparks rambling and failing to make anyone laugh. I really hate you, Sparks. There's one final post-credit scene where Spyro and Cinder express worry over the future, not really adding much to anything. As a whole, the story is good, but it's about on par with the stories of classic Spyro games. Basic, somewhat repetitive, but hard to dislike. Some standout moments to me are Spyro learning to fly and the cutscene following Cinder's defeat. I wish we got more Cinder, both adult and young. She steals the show whenever she's on screen as a villain, but she gets all of 3 lines after being saved, and those don't even contribute to her character. I guess that was being saved for Eternal Night. For how good the endings of both sequels are, A New Beginning's closure feels out of place by comparison. It was so close to being something special. If Sparks was taken out of the final scene, if Cinder got some lines, and if the Dragon Guardians got to say their piece, I could see A New Beginning having a wonderful conclusion. But as it stands, the ending leaves quite a bit to be desired. Before I give my final thoughts, I want to discuss the music. This entire trilogy is some of the best video game music I have ever heard. Every area has a distinct song that perfectly complements the environment. Every combat theme readies you for the fight while sticking to the theme of the level. Some of my favorites include the main theme of the apes, heard when fighting them in level 1, level 3's combat music, Munitions Forge, the volcano level, Train Chase, Cinder's Convexity boss music, but perhaps the best song in this game is the main theme, heard on the title screen, various cutscenes, and during the credits. This song perfectly sets the tone for the game, a whimsical, fantastical adventure, a hopeful start to a new series. A New Beginning is not a game I can say I dislike, despite how much I complained about it. But for everything I liked, the story, the combat, the music, there was always something that kept it from shining. The story was enjoyable and had its moments, but it was repetitive, and what could have been a great ending scene was undercut by Spark's comic relief. The combat was let down by a lack of enemy variety and complexity, turning into button mashing and breath attack spam. That issue would not be so bad if 90% of the game wasn't monkey battles, but with no collectibles or even optional content, there's just not enough to warrant anything beyond an initial playthrough. And while there's not a single song I dislike, the soundtrack feels like it does not fully fit the aesthetic and appearance of the game at times. In other words, it's too good. What you see is what you get, and unfortunately, I can't say A New Beginning is anything greater than thoroughly mediocre. When I first played it, it was hard to put into words how I felt about it, but after playing Eternal Night, I feel that A New Beginning is afraid of itself in a sense. The combat is simple, so everyone can get through it. The story undercuts its serious moments to avoid true sincerity, and the trailers were vague because of the inevitable backlash such a departure from Spyro's roots would cause. And at the very least, that last bit is right. So many people reject this trilogy for not being classic Spyro, for daring to try something new when the series had stagnated, for trying to be anything except a silly collectathon dragon game. As this trilogy demonstrates, you can have a silly premise, a goofy series, but still tell incredible, emotional stories. Unfortunately, that's not entirely true in A New Beginning, but that's fine. It's merely setting the foundations for what the sequels would accomplish. A New Beginning is a game I can see as being great in another world, if it allowed itself to be what it should have been, uncompromised by what I see as developer insecurities. However, despite Legend of Spyro's rough start, the next 2 entries made the series carve a legacy of its own, and one to be proud of.